What would you say to somebody who argues that sure, back then at the beginning of this nation, it might have been vulnerable to tyranny, but now we've been around for 240 years, and the likelihood of tyranny happening is very slim. It makes sense that the founding fathers would have been concerned about it, but we don't need to be concerned about it now.
Your devil's advocate is not so convincing. That's what I've got to say. But I'm going to answer you on the substance anyway. I mean that view that you've just described is American exceptionalism of a really naive kind, which I think no true patriot can actually look himself or herself in the eyes and accept. We have had a constitutional system with the rule of law from the beginning, but we have not been a democracy from the beginning. There has been tyranny of various sorts, whether it was over slaves or over women or over others for most of the existence of this country. America as a democracy is much more an aspiration than a reality. We got fairly close to it in the 1970s, and now we are drifting away. So the two basic things I would say is, first, we're not exceptional. If you say America's exceptional or that it can't happen here or that our institutions will save us, you are then, whether you want to or not, taking the side of the tyrants, taking the side of the authoritarians, because when you say it can't happen here, you're making it happen here, because it's only the individual citizen and his or her actions that prevents it from happening here. That's the first thing that I would say. The second thing that I would say is that if one looks around at the state of American democracy before Mr. Trump was elected, things were really not well. With the gerrymandering, with the voter suppression laws, with the unlimited money in politics, with the Electoral College itself, which the founders left us, we are somewhere between, a democracy and an oligarchy. And it's just dreaming to think that there weren't already crises before this man was elected. This person has his own problems, but he also is an embodiment of the problems of American democracy that we already had to struggle with.
This is exactly why I wanted you on our show, Tim. Thank you. That was a great response. There are critics who have used any variation of the word fascist or fascism to describe the actions of the Trump administration, whether it's neo-fascist or pre-fascist or proto-fascist. Is it unfair to label Trump as any variation of fascist? And is it more accurate framing, again, the actions the administration has taken in the first 100 days through a more general lens of tyranny than through a more specific lens of fascism?
Mm-hmm. So, first of all, it reminds me of a recent obsession I've had with political correctness. Basically, the most politically correct thing on the right in this country is now to call other people politically correct. And yet one notices that there's a very strong taboo about using references to history to describe problems in the present. As soon as one makes any reference to fascism or the 1930s, immediately one hears that there's no resemblance, that history doesn't repeat, and so on and so forth. So the approach that I take in the book is to describe not to describe the Trump administration, which, remember, hadn't even started when I wrote the book. So, any resemblance between things I wrote in December and events now, shows how useful history is in describing and even in predicting. But the approach that I take is to be humble about history, to notice that democracy usually fails, whether it's in the direction of fascism or communism or National Socialism or just plain old kleptocracy, which is the current dominant form of tyranny, and to try to learn general lessons, to read the people who are smarter than we, facing challenges that are greater than challenges we face, to accept that their generosity in leaving behind lessons of their own experience, and then to look for places where those lessons apply. It seems to me that is more important than a specific label. Now, that said, with Trump, I think it's appropriate to say that there are certain things that he does or that Mr. Bannon does or things that they say which are very similar to fascism. So the Trump rallies, if you read the transcripts, they resemble very strongly the records that are left to us of rallies of fascists or National Socialists in the 20s or 30s. The speech patterns that he has, no doubt unwillingly or unknowingly, are very similar to speech patterns that fascists use, and this is one of the points I make in the book. And there's certain kinds of fascist politics, like, for example, looking at globalization and saying globalization is not a challenge. Globalization is a personal problem. We're going to put a face on globalization, whether it's the Chinese or the Mexicans or the Jews or the elites or what have you. That's a fascist tactic, to say, no, we can't face up to these challenges, therefore we're going to give them a face. we're going to delude the population, we're going to delude the people into saying there's one particular enemy that's responsible for the objective problems of the world. So, I mean, I think like just sticking a label on something doesn't solve a problem, but I do think that recognizing the resemblances between the politics of 2017 and the politics of the 1930s can be very instructive. Yeah.
You were mentioning the words of Steve Bannon and the words of Donald Trump that may sound in some way fascistic, or people might think that it sounds that way. You write, the mistake is to assume that people who come to power through institutions cannot change or destroy those very institutions, even when that is exactly what they have announced that they will do. Revolutionaries sometimes do intend to destroy institutions all at once. How much do we underestimate the power or value or reality of political rhetoric? Do we not take it seriously enough? Do we take it too seriously? How much does even underestimating a politician's words, how much can that lead to tyranny?
That's a wonderful question, and I want to repeat your premise because it's so important. The research of political scientists shows that in most of the recent transitions to authoritarian regimes, the leader who engineers the transition was elected. That's the method of choice at this point. So the fact that someone was elected does not mean that an electoral system will continue in any meaningful way. That's a very important premise, and therefore the question becomes so important. What do we know about the leader before he comes to power? In Mr. Trump's case, he made it very clear that he would not respect the outcome of the election, i.e., he's not a Democrat. His whole long life has been a challenge to the rule of law. He admires foreign tyrants, but doesn't admire or doesn't even know of the existence of important American figures. Frederick Douglass is an obvious example. So we're looking, for all we knew, the man was an aspiring tyrant. And although it seems odd to say so, it somehow seems orthogonal to how we're used to talking. He made that very clear to us, that he didn't have any respect for these basic American institutions. And that was, I think, the source of a lot of his popularity, because a lot of Americans also don't. How we misplayed it was to see it as entertainment. So the man, the man has certain skills, and he has certain talents, and he has a certain kind of intelligence, and that skills, talent, and intelligence are directed towards a form of public relations in which he draws you into the notion that life is really just reality television, that it's all just about feeling entertained for a moment or feeling affirmed for a moment. And what the big networks did for far, far too long was to allow that reality show to go on and to allow us to be entertained. But it turned out that the entertainment was far too close to seduction, in fact, and we let the nature of a democratic campaign be fundamentally changed sort of day by day before our eyes. So it's entertaining for someone to destroy all of the norms of conventional behavior. It was entertaining, but it's also extremely dangerous, and that's where we are.